Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I would like to welcome you all to the City Council work session for the Committee of the Whole, Police Commission, Fire Commission, and School Board and City Council here in the Eileen Dondero Foley City Council chambers for the preliminary budget review that we're going to undertake this evening. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to John Bohenko.
Thank you, Your Honor. What you have in front of you are three documents, and I'll go through each one of those. And the first one is the 2011 budget schedule. And as we go through this, I would ask either anybody from the boards or commissions if they have any concerns about the dates that are reflective to their meetings to let us know. If we don't hear from people by Tuesday, what we're going to do is we're going to put this schedule up on the web so people know when the meetings are and what's going to happen with the budget process. Tonight, obviously, we're here on the Committee of the Whole. It's January 14th. The Fire Commission has scheduled their first public hearing on the proposed fiscal year 11 budget on the 20th. The School Board has the 21st, and I believe that's at Little Harbor. The Planning Board will be reviewing and adopting the capital improvement plan to be sent on to the City Council on the 21st. And then the Police Commission public hearing on the proposed FY11 is scheduled for February 3rd. It's a Wednesday. And then the City Council has a work session on the CIP on February 8th. The School Board has its second public hearing on the proposed FY11 budget on February 9th. The City Council on March 1st will hold a public hearing on the CIP. And then on March 15th, the City Council will be adopting the CIP because in accordance with the Charter, we can't proceed any further on the budget process until the City Council adopts the capital improvement plan. And then on April 14th, there will be a public hearing. The City Manager, along with the other departments, will be presenting the fiscal year 11 proposed budget with presentations from police, fire, school, and other municipal departments. And then on Wednesday, April 21st, the first work session with the City Council to review the school department budget. April 22nd, work session with the City Council to review the municipal budget. April 28th, work session with the City Council to review the police department budget and fire department budget. And then on May 10th, we'll have a reopening of the public hearing on the proposed FY11 budget. And then a work session after that public hearing with the City Council to review final issues of the budget, and hopefully we'd have adoption of the FY11 budget on June 7th. I might add that under the Charter, the budget has to be completed and adopted by June 30th. If it is not, then the proposed budget that the City Manager submits to the City Council is automatically adopted. Just some footnotes: all work sessions will be at 6:30 p.m. All public hearings will be at 7 p.m. Wherever possible, they will be televised here in the council chambers. The other two sheets attached are just backups to the CIP schedule, which those of you that have been participating in that have been at many of the meetings and are fully aware of that schedule. So, does anybody have any questions or concerns relative to the schedule? If you don't, and you think of something on Tuesday or tomorrow, please let me know. We'll make those adjustments, and then what we'll do is we'll post this to the website so people will have full knowledge of when all the meetings will be taking place. The next item you have is the landscape version of a document. And this document, we put together, the Finance Department and I put together this document, and it has very preliminary, and I like to try to stress that, very preliminary major impacts to the FY11 budget. Item number 1 is step and COLA increases. And in all of these items that we have here, and whatever you see, we have assumed that collective bargaining agreements will be successfully negotiated. So this includes all costs for 15 collective bargaining agreements of the city. I believe only 8 of the collective bargaining agreements have settled as of right now. But if those other collective bargaining agreements are settled in a similar fashion with the 10-year rolling average and other items that are similar to other contracts, those are the assumptions that we made. Plus, we made the assumptions of step increases as well. So, and in addition to that, under item number 1, you'll see that in accordance with the contract that we're dealing with a 10-year rolling average, which means that salary increases for on the contractual agreements will be 2.82%, and then plus if there are other steps. So over to the right, you'll see the estimated total cost, and that's $1.7 million for the general fund for the city, or a 45-cent impact on the tax rate. And then below, we thought it'd be important for people to understand some of the number of employees that are on step, and we've done that just for information purposes. And again, those go in accordance with contracts that we believe might be in place. The next page you have, item number 2 is health insurance. And if, for those of you that are new to the process, we have set up a health insurance stabilization fund. And what we've done is over the last 10 years, what we've done is we have budgeted the 10-year average, and that happens to be 11.62%. And our actual guaranteed maximum rate increase, coincidentally, came out to 11.7%. So we are looking at an 11.7% increase for health insurance. And if you look at the document, you'll see that employee share is about $2.3 million, and the city share is about $6 million, and the overall cost of health insurance for the city is about $13 million. The portion that affects the general fund would be $1.1 million, or 29 cents on the tax rate. Moving down to item number 3, retirement increases. We showed the retirement increase, as you're aware. The last fiscal year 10, the state legislature reduced the amount of that they participated from 35% to 30%. And in fiscal 11, it went from 30% to 25%, and these numbers reflect those changes. So you see the retirement costs are increasing by about $456,000, or 12 cents on the rate. And you'll see later on in the presentation, in the next document, we'll be talking about the fiscal year 12 and 13, but we'll be also talking about some of the more major impacts on the on that retirement end that's supposed to be coming. Item number 4 is increase the net debt service. So we have a number of projects that have moved forward that we're going to be bonding for. And the net debt increase over above fiscal 10 is $1,335,000. This is a number that we can't touch. We're obligated to this number, and that's 35 cents on the tax rate. The county tax obligation, we used a 4% increase for fiscal year 11, but we called the county a couple times, and they've indicated that they're sending out the budget today. They wouldn't give us the actual number. So we'll get that, and we have, and I sent out in the City Council's packet when the public hearing will be before the county. We may want to make our position known on some of the issues there. But one of the things that you have to remember about the county, as values drop in other communities, and if our values stay the same, what happens is we garner a larger share of the cost in the county because it's based on the valuation. And so even it might show a 2 or 3% increase in budget, we might end up with a 4 or 5% increase depending on how the pie is reallocated because of our values held and other people's values went down. So we now have a bigger piece of the pie. So that's something to remember. So if you happen to see the budget for the county and all of a sudden it says 2% and we're saying it's going up 4%, well, we may be going up higher than others on the overall basis. And again, once they send us that bill, we have to pay it. If we don't, they attach our bank accounts. No, they do. The capital outlay. Now, here is an area that is something that could be reduced and certainly will probably be looked at. But this is the first go-around with the capital improvement subcommittee of the planning board. For many years, we've tried to maintain capital so that we don't fall behind. Last year, because of the economic circumstances that surrounded us as we put together the budget, we dropped the capital down to $800,000, which we needed to do to make sure that we had a viable budget. The committee felt strongly about bringing that back, and they did. And so there is the $700,000 increase, but again, that can be flexible, and that's 18 cents on the budget. The overlay, next year, in accordance with state law, we will be doing our mandatory revaluation, and as part of that mandatory revaluation, we will be setting values throughout the city and going through and doing that. But as a result of revaluations, we typically will have people out challenge the values that we put on their property. And as part of that challenge, sometimes we win some, sometimes we lose some, or sometimes we settle them. And so what can happen is that we have to repay, because sometimes it takes about 2 years to go through the process with the Board of Tax and Land Appeals, and we have to then pay back. And that's why we have overlay, to pay back when we have a dispute, and if we've lost that dispute, or if we settle that dispute. Then we have a use of one-time revenue sources. Now I'm going to the revenue side of the budget, leaving the expenditure side for those of you that are new. A combination of revenue and expenditures, will affect the tax rate, as obviously higher expenditures will increase the tax rate, lower revenues will increase the tax rate as well. And the use of one-time revenue was, as a result of last year, we put $1,053,000 in from fund balance to cover collective bargaining agreements. That's at 28 cents on the tax rate. Loss of school transition grant from the state of New Hampshire. We're going to be losing $222,000 in fiscal year 11 that we got in fiscal year 10. And one of the reasons is, again, our values held and other values throughout the state fell. And the state legislature has a law in place that basically says so much money has to be raised for education. So what they had to do was raise the statewide property tax to get to that threshold. And we, in accordance with the formula, which I won't get into, it's a complicated formula, actually fell outside of getting transition aid because of that. So that is $222,000 that we will be losing next year, that we had last year. In addition, just have to remember that last year we also lost $657,000 in revenue sharing. So that has been a hit for us as well. And we're finding that we have a continued downward trend on motor vehicle permits for fiscal year 11. Again, we use trends. We try to watch this carefully. One of the areas that we have to be very careful of is not to be over rosy in our revenue projections, because that can cause us many, many problems into future years. One mistake on the revenue side that's substantial will affect us going for 2 or 3 years, because if we're over rosy, that means, and we don't have the money available, then in the next year, it's almost a double whammy for us. So we have to be careful in that regard. So we're saying that will be about $200,000 less than we anticipate, and that's 5 cents on the rate. If you look at the overall, all those items that I've talked about for fiscal year 11, we're talking about $7,677,000, which would mean that we would, if we kept everything from fiscal 10, all services the same, and dealt with the revenues by adding it to the tax rate, the revenue loss by adding it to the tax rate, we would have an increase in the tax rate of $2.02. Obviously, we're at the beginning of the process. These are preliminary numbers, but I think it's important that everybody's aware of our soft spots within the budget. Moving on to the next document, what I tried to do, the council had requested that I try to put together some projections for 3 years, fiscal year 11, 12, and 13. Now, this is always very difficult and always has, it's a little treacherous sometimes trying to go out 3 fiscal years. But what we did is we used the best information we had. We used assuming that all contracts were in place, using the 10-year rolling average, because we're going to find that the rolling average is probably not going to move much over that time. We have a lot of history on health health insurance. So using all the history that we have, plus using the retirement, which we know, we used basically on the numbers, we used a more middle of the road type of projection on we didn't use the doom and gloom on the retirement. We assumed that the state was going to continue the 25% subsidy rather than eliminating the whole subsidy. We weren't as optimistic that they would come back with a 35%, but if they do, that'd be wonderful. So what we did is we are showing these projected budgets. So if you look at the column for fiscal year 11, you can see all the way down that the budget increase is estimated at $5,960,000, or about a 7% over a previous year. And we show what the retirement increase would be in that year. And then moving over to fiscal 12, going all the way down, you see that we're estimating a $6 million budget increase over 11, or about a 6.7%. And this is where the retirement really kicks in for us. And then moving to the next year, fiscal 13, you can see that it's $6.7 million increase over fiscal 12, or a 7% increase from the previous year. So these give you an understanding that over the next 3 years, we're going to have some real strain on the budget. And if Your Honor, do you want me to wait to answer questions, or?
Well, why don't we, what I'd like to suggest at this point, John has laid out the picture as you see it.
I was going to finish.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and finish?
Hands were up, so I
yeah,
just...
we're going to wait on questions for a moment till he's done, and then we'll go from there.
Right, and then moving on to the next 2 pages, which I'm not going to go into, are the various departments: municipal department, police department, fire department, and school department. Those are just for your information. I don't think we need to go into the details of those. That's all I have on that, Your Honor. Just these are the numbers that we have laid out. One of the things I would like to note, under the numbers that I presented to you, just as a benchmark so people understand what we're up against, if you took all the operating in the increase to operating in fiscal 11, which is $3,161,000 that we estimate, and you keep CIP at fiscal 10's level, and you keep overlay at fiscal 10's level, the things that we can adjust, we'd still have, with no operating increase and those cuts in those other areas, we'd still have an 85-cent tax increase. So I just want to kind of put that in perspective for people. Okay. So if you basically, if you had an operating from fiscal 10 to fiscal 11 of no increase, total operating, and you cut the CIP by $700,000 and the overlay by $600,000, which keeps them status quo to the fiscal 10, you'd still have an 85-cent tax increase. Because we have certain fixed costs that we're obligated to, such as debt service, county, et cetera. That's what I have, Your Honor. Now I'd open it up to questions.
Thank you. What I'd like to do before we open it up to questions is just briefly see if we can frame the discussion and then proceed with questions, comments, et cetera, as we typically do. State and municipalities nationwide face pictures just like you have heard here, as set forth in some detail by our city manager. So I believe that, and it is my hope, that we focus on what it is we have to spend going forward and how the spending best serves our city. The factors which cause these costs increase from retirement benefits, contractual obligations, debt service, whatever it is, state and local pressures, these are pressures that every municipal government experiences, and it's where we find ourselves. And I strongly believe, as we engage in this discussion, that it's not appropriate, frankly, to assign blame or fault to how the system got the way it is and what it is, but rather look at where we have to go from here and see what that means to our community. It's a situation we have to manage, and to go back and look at who made what mistake in 1985 really doesn't do us any good here as we try to go forward and put a budget together that's going to work for everybody and be appropriate. To do that, I think we need to focus on what it would take as just a benchmark to understand what would it take to spend the same that we spent last year, that is to say fiscal 2010, for an analytical tool. And so in order to do that, again, as an analytical tool to consider this and look at impacts of what this might be, we would have to spend, after discussion with the city manager and understanding the comparative numbers, 96% of the operating funds that we spent in 2010 would be what we would have to spend in order to stay relatively level. Now, it also means that we might consider, and I believe we ought to consider, if we were to look at over a 2-year period, because in front of you, you have data going out in time, and I think it's important for us to look just beyond the 1 year. Perhaps if we were to consider, as part of that 96% expenditure as a template for analysis, 5 years, a 5% reduction in workforce, 2% in 2011 and 3% in 2012, and look at what those impacts might be. Now, as we go forward tonight and we start the ball rolling, I have to say that in informal discussions with my fellow councilors, we believe that this discussion process will probably engender consideration of the size of our government and what that means. And so if we're talking about the kinds of reductions that I just discussed to look at, we need to understand as councilors, and you need to, as commissions and school board and as city staff, be able to help us understand what potential impacts would be as we look at those kinds of reductions in our budget, because I don't think any city councilor certainly, and I'm sure the rest of you, don't want to make mindless cuts that don't make sense if we're going to do that. So I believe this may be a new direction for our city at this time. I think we're going to also need a lot of citizen input, and that this is a big discussion amongst a lot of people to see how we might go through this. And I believe that my fellow councilors don't perceive cutting or adding funds is either a penalty or a reward. Rather, it's a circumstance where we have to look at what the community might have to spend and how we're going to do it. So I wish you all well as we begin on this process, and I wanted to say that at the outset. And with that, those of you may have questions right away for John, or we can start talking about it. That'd be great. So I see Councilor Spear.
I just had a clarification from the city manager. The revenue reductions that were mentioned, can you explain where they show up on the projected budgets?
That's the expenditure side. The
Right.
revenue side is missing from this sheet here.
Do they show up in increased costs on this sheet, or not at all on
No,
this sheet?
not at all, because that's the expenditure side. We didn't put the revenue side in. If you go back to, if you went to your budget book and you had the summary, you'll see there's a listing of revenues. All we did on the summary, what the sheet that you're referring to is a major impact sheet, and that's to show what possibly will impact the general fund tax rate.
So the increase in the about $2 increase is, and we can see it, somewhat due to the operating or the non-operating budget increases and the shortfalls in revenue.
Correct.
Right.
Councilor Coviello, and then Chairman Gamester. Councilor Coviello.
John, is that the answer to that question? Is that why we see under 2011 on this sheet 5.9 million increase rather than the 7.6?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And
Because
then-
when you get the entire budget, it's too early to put all budget projections for the revenues together yet. But what this sheet, don't get this sheet confused with the actual budget sheet. This is just a list of major impacts.
And if I may follow up,
Sure.
just because I'm new again, can you explain the overlay? What is that again?
Certainly. Overlay is an amount of money that we put aside in the event that we need to pay back a property owner that we might have assessed that has challenged our assessment, and it goes through the process, and for whatever reason, we find that the assessment was not correct, or that we settle it before it goes to the court system, and then we pay it back through the overlay.
Does that cover court costs as well?
Yes. I mean, we typically, we try to avoid court. You go through the Board of Tax and Land Appeals, and we try to avoid it. We do a lot of it internally. Our city attorney's office does 99% of it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gamester.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Marini. John, good job. in your staff.
I just hate to interrupt, but because we're sharing mics, not unlike a large band, we all need to make sure we carefully speak into them. So if you're switching, you look around, make sure when you're ready to speak, you have one in front of you. Thanks. Sorry.
Thank you very much. John, one question on your impact sheet. Use of one-time revenues.
Right.
And it shows a 28-cent cost for the 2011.
Right.
Did we not put $1 million away last year and pay for it?
We put
Also.
Okay, so it's going to be, okay. What happens is, once you use a one-time revenue source, and you put it in the budget, put the $1 million in, next year you don't have that in there, right? So in order to make up that $1 million, you've got to make that up through the tax rate.
Can I just ask a question? If we put money away last year for this, for pending contracts, did we use the $1 million last year?
No, we didn't, but there is money in there for retroactivity, and we've basically encumbered that money.
Okay, so
But that money won't cover all contracts for fiscal 11 if they're
so
settled.
you're anticipating the use of more than $1 million that we put away last
Right.
year?
Because it was so the way to understand it is, you use it last year, there's $1 million there, we don't use it this year, you got to make up that donut hole of sorts with taxes. It is encumbered, that money is set aside, so when the contracts are approved, you're going to have retroactivity, and we're going to have to pay that retroactivity.
Right.
Similar to what happened with the school department. When the school department settled their contract, we took $1 million that we had raised from tax rate and transferred it into the school department's budget. Okay?
Yeah, I guess we took $1 million last year, basically, set it aside, and we paid for it last year.
Right.
With taxes. That money
No, that's where you made the error.
Okay, that's where I'm making an error.
You didn't pay it with taxes. You paid it with your savings account.
Okay, end of question. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Yep.
can I can't keep track of all the hands at once, so get your hands up and we'll see who I see first. Okay, Dr. Schulman, then Dr. Lister.
Thank you, John. Just one quick question, and it's always difficult to ask what might be a stupid question, so I apologize up front. If you look at your very preliminary first page,
Right.
and for 2011, that $5.9 million at a 7.09%
Which document are you talking about? Okay,
first
fine.
one, right?
Okay, sure.
So what I just want to make sure I understand. That number, 5.9, what's the relationship of that number to the $7.6 million impact?
All right. The 5.9 is expenditure side. The additional, if you look to the sheet on the last page, is the revenue side. So when you do a budget, you have your revenue side has to equal your expenditure side. If you're, for every $3.8 million is a dollar on the tax rate. So if you have an increase in expenditures of $3 million, and you have a decrease of revenue of $800,000, you have a dollar increase on the tax rate, $300,000,
Plus
$800,000,
3.8.
and that's the increase. So for every dollar on the tax rate, you either have an increase in expenditures or a decrease in revenues. Does that explain it?
So this is just the expenditures.
I don't want to be confused. We just did major impacts. And
Right.
so if you took the almost the $6 million, and if you look at the items that are under revenues, so they're a decrease in revenues. The $6 million or the $5.9 million, however you want to refer to it, is an increase in expenditures. So you have the increase of almost $6 million in expenditures and a reduction of approximately $1.6 million in revenues.
Okay.
Council Lister, then Council Dwyer, then Chief.
Thank you. I'd also like to say I appreciate looking at this 3 years out, because typically my experience with the budget is that we've looked at this year by year, and I think we're way beyond that now, having to think out of the box and look far ahead. I do, and I know in the future we're going to be talking about people, which is what Portsmouth is about, people. But we also have other items in being concerned about the lack of maintenance or ignoring maintenance on buildings down the road here. Can I just ask, the capital outlay, the $800,000 that was taken out last year, that was taken out, would there do we have a handle, is this an appropriate time to ask what was not funded or?
We could go back to that. That would probably be something during your work session on the CIP we can get into more detail on.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm trying to remember who I saw next. I think Councilor Dwyer, then Chief Berlin, and then Esther.
Well, it follows Mitch's question, because I do think that we're all likely to get confused about it. It's really important that we not read that percentage change line as if that is the total percentage change line increase. So, you know, as we take these documents away from here and whatever, we need to make sure we.
Correct. Yeah, the intent was to try to clarify in one place where your major impacts are. And one other thing to watch when you look on the expenditure side, if you look at the debt service, you say, well, the debt service, when we get the budget, the debt service is going up a lot more than $1.3 million. Well, that's the net number, because we offset that from the revenue side, because there are grants coming in from the state for school construction aid, so we estimate.
Anything further this time, Councilor Dwyer? Okay, Chief Ferlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question. When you were talking about 96% of FY10's operating budget, are you looking for each department to come in with a budget of that to show you what it looks like?
Yes.
All right, so let me, and I just want to be clear on something, because last year the 0% recommendation quickly became a mandate the next day. And I just need some clarification. Is that 96% of FY10 a mandate for each department?
Well, what I'm going to say is what I would have said the same thing last year. First of all, I don't agree that it was a mandate. I think that it was part of a discussion. This is not a formal city council meeting where a number is voted on. Rather, it's the beginning of a discussion of what, as a guideline, what kind of impact we would have if we did that 96%. I think city councilors well appreciate, as I'm sure board members and commission members appreciate, that different departments have different and conflicting needs. We are not looking by any means, and I think I hope I speak for a number of my fellow councilors, when we go forward and we look at this, we appreciate that the devil will be in the details in every department, and we want to have that detailed discussion, because otherwise we have our budget vote a week from now. And that's the last thing we think is appropriate for the community. Rather, a full and complete open discussion of what impacts might be. It might mean that sort of goal is an analytical tool. I don't know where we're going to end up at the end. I think at this time it makes sense as an analytical tool.
Thank you, sir.
Councilor Kennedy.
Yeah, I have 2 points of clarification I just would like to have if I could. One, if you look at the very preliminary budget report.
Sure.
The budget increase on in each area, I'm assuming if you add those up, like for example, you add up FY11, you get a total of around $9,585,476. Am I right in adding those up, and that would give a total?
It should.
Okay.
I mean, if you took every department and then took the non-operating, then certainly it should add up.
Okay.
We hope.
Just there was no total, and I was just making sure I did it
The
right.
total, basically, you'd come to the front here, and you look at the bottom, and the total operating and non-operating for fiscal 11 that's projected is $89,999,229.
Okay.
Right. Right. The non-operating, we didn't print the non-operating twice, so because we did originally look at it, and we didn't want to give you an extra piece of paper. So if you add up all the individual departments, then you have to all add the non-operating in here too.
Okay. So, yeah, that's what I kind of figured. Now, my second question is, when will the reevaluation be completed to the point where you see it? When will the reevaluation be completed to the point where the citizens actually get their reevaluation figure? What year, what day?
Right. The actual tax year starts April 1st. You're not going to get your numbers on April 1st, but that's when so over the period of the summer and into probably August, September, we probably will have better handle on getting the the new values out. It might be more October. And then, once the values are in place, then it would then be set by DRA, the new tax rate. It wouldn't affect the amount of money you raise in taxes. It basically, you have a certain size pie, and basically, as the values have been adjusted, you're not going to reduce the amount of money you have to raise or increase the money you have to raise. You're going to actually, somebody might have less to pay, somebody might have more to pay, depending on what happens to the value of their property. Everybody will have the opportunity to go through and have a hearing. So what we'll do is, it might be useful over the next few months for the city council to have the assessor come in and have a full discussion relative to that. I think it's going to be a useful thing, and certainly the council can schedule that. And we've done that in the past, and we had intended that we would do that, so that would help give you a better understanding of the time frame.
So your prediction is that in October 2010.
Correct.
There will be a value given to each household. Now, given that most values have gone down across the state, what is your projection, or when will we get the projection of what you think those values will be?
We don't have that yet. It'd be too preliminary to say, but certainly we'd like to have a work session with the city council when we have a better handle on it.
Chief Leclerc.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. John, on the 85-cent tax increase, you talked about things staying the same as last year.
Yeah.
Was that including the salary increases as well?
Yeah, it
85 cents?
no, it didn't. I'm sorry, Chief. I just wanted to say that what I said, so it could give you the enormity of the task that we have. It basically said, if we didn't have any increase in operating, if you see the total on operating on the front page is, let's see, I don't have my glasses on. Not on this page. It's $3,161,000. And you take and you don't have any increase to CPI, that's $700,000 that listed on the impact page, and you don't have any increase in overlay, then we'd still have an 85-cent increase. So it would not include any operating increase. So it would affect you, because what we can't touch is the county increase. We can't touch the net debt increase. And so that's what I was trying to explain.
Chief.
My concern, and I would caution the council, and I certainly appreciate the amount of work that went into it, but I would caution the council on putting too much stock in the very preliminary sheets. I know that the only column that we know for sure is the second column that says fiscal year 10 budget, because those are the actual numbers. Anything past that is really a gamble. It's an assumption. And you're assuming that contracts will get settled. You're certainly more optimistic than I am. And that assumes a 3.14% increase and a 2.82% increase in fiscal year 11. And if I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, Judy, a 2% increase in operating. So when you bring in numbers like that really aren't based in reality, and then try to extrapolate that out over fiscal year 12 and 13, you end up with projected increases, huge projected increases that are based on numbers that aren't real.
Well, let me speak to that, if I might, Your Honor. The exercise that we're doing here is to give a realistic view of what we will expect over the next 3 years. We expect that there will be contracts settled, unless you have something better that I don't, but we will be giving salary increases to people. And typically, when we've settled those, it's been based on the rolling average of the last 10 years. So we expect that to happen. Now, not getting into collective bargaining here, because I really don't think it's appropriate, but hypothetically, you are right. If let's say we don't settle a contract for 4 years, let's say, and we don't give any retroactivity. So basically, people that don't have contracts settled today, and they settle them 4 years from now, and don't get any retroactivity, that would be a correct statement that you made. But from my understanding, and from actually historically, we have always, at least not, we have never gone 4 years without a collective bargaining agreement. But I would gather that we would probably not go and have any retroactivity. But you are correct. If we settle the police contracts, the fire contracts, and the public works contracts 4 years from now or 3 years from now, and we choose not to give any retroactivity, your statement is correct.
Hold on, Mr. Mayor.
Sure.
My point, Mr. Mayor, is it's going to be very difficult, and it's a long process that we have to go through with commission meetings and meetings with the council and public hearings on budgets to try to find a number, as the mayor says, that we can all work and live with. And my concern is this sheet's going out to the press, it's going out to the public, and I certainly don't want to cause any panic over these numbers, because when the budget is all said and done, fiscal year 11, if what you're shooting for becomes true, it won't be anywhere near these numbers.
Well, let me just respond to that, because I think that's incorrect.
Please do.
If you have a situation where you have no contract increase and your budget doesn't, you don't have to put in the increases for the rolling average. You still have to put your step increases in. You still have to put your retirement in. You still have to put your health insurance in. You still have to put all that in. So even assuming what you just said, let's say half of the $1.7 million doesn't go forward, because we already have 8 collective bargaining agreements settled. That's still 22 cents on the rate. Everything else, I believe, is valid that I've talked about. Retirement is a number that's an absolute, unless you have some other knowledge that I don't have. The debt service is an absolute. County will be required. Health insurance is an absolute. So I want to make sure that people also know that you don't want to go in with a situation where you think you have a better picture, and then find out once you settle the contracts that now you have retroactivity that you don't have funds to pay for. That's the issue. I'm very hopeful we'll settle the contracts. I'm hopeful that we'll have a fair and equitable agreement among all employees, and that's how we base this. I think you're right that we should look at these as very preliminary. We always have said that, but we have to start somewhere, and this is where to start. This is an unusual year. This is a year that we have lost revenues. We've had an unprecedented economic circumstance happening. In my years in local government, I've been through 3 of these, and you usually are probably 18 months to 24 months behind the private sector. Usually the wave hits the public sector 18 months to 24 months after it's hit the private sector. It's been my experience. So I'm just throwing these numbers out. I have a fiduciary responsibility to try to do the best I can to let the city council know, the policymakers know, that these are potential impacts that could affect the city. If I'm wrong, and I don't think I'm that far off, I believe that we can then make adjustments, as the mayor said. This is the first step down a long road. I mean, we have till June. We have till June 30th. So if I'm wrong, fine. I mean, we'll adjust it as we go along. But I think it's important for the council to understand those weak points within the budget, because I don't think it does anybody any service, the employees, the taxpayers, or anybody, if we just ignore what's coming down the road. And that's all I'm trying to put forward. I'm not trying to create any hysteria here. I'm trying to lay out numbers that show what the potential worst case scenario is for the city, and that's my responsibility.
Councilor Dwyer.
Yeah, kind of building on what the chief said, to me, the panic would be in the public if people didn't, if we couldn't look at this and see the chaotic structure and the structural problems in the country and in the state for what it really is. I mean, that would be the panic, that we weren't really seeing what the problems were. And to me, what this says, if you look over a 3-year period and you understand what that percentage change is, because that doesn't have the revenue side in it, and you did nothing, even at very modest increases, you'd be looking at like a 30% increase in the tax rate. So to me, there's a message from that I think is really important, which is this is the opportunity to be proactive in restructuring for the long term. and to have each department really solidly look at what it can do for the long term and not assume that there's a fairy godmother or a Band-Aid or a patch that's going to do it this time. Because to everybody's credit, there's not a lot of fat in people's budgets. It's not like you can pull out a little patch. People have done that kind of thing already. So I think by looking at it for 3 years, it's kind of what Bob said. When you look at it for 3 years, it says to you, we better get on the stick and not think that this is going to go away, because there's not a lot of time to think about the level of restructuring that will get us to anything reasonable over the next couple of years. And I would say this is my 5th committee of the whole, and I always go away thinking that the council has given a very clear message. And then down the road, and, you know, from people sitting around this table, you hear, well, they never told us. We had no idea what the numbers were. And it's like the Gary Larson cartoons, you know, what's being heard, what people are saying and what's being heard. So to me, you don't even have to say anything when you look at these columns of figures. It's very clear that to be able to think about sustainability for our city, departments have to think about restructuring. Even if the minor changes that just occurred between the two of you are true, the long-term picture, I mean, you know the state picture and you know the national picture. These are costs that aren't going away. We have the retirement structure that's built in. We have the tax structure that we have in our state. And I just think it would be, to me, it would, if I were a member of the public, I would panic if we weren't taking this really seriously. I think we need to take it really seriously this year, and I certainly hope that what we don't hear, you know, over the next couple months from the departments is no one ever told us. If someone had just been clear that we really have to make cuts, I think that message somehow this year has to actually get through.
School board member LePage, and then Council Coviello, then Councilor Smith.
First of all, I have two questions for City Manager Bohenko, and then just a question going back to the mayor. Within the very preliminary projection of the budgets and trying to stay abreast of what the state is doing, John, does this show the statewide property tax increase for education that could hit us, or is by court order, is that for, I believe it would be coming in on the 2012 year. I think it starts middle of the 2011. That's my first question for you. Then I had another one.
All right, go ahead.
That's a good question. It doesn't show that. I didn't put that in. The so-called collar, which has held people harmless till July 1, 2012, which would be a fiscal 12, which would be fiscal July 1, 2011, excuse me, 2011, which would be a fiscal year 12 impact, as you stated. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. So, for example, if the statewide property, it depends on how or what formula. If the formula stays in place, we have a positive outcome on that. If, for example, the formula changes and there is a change in how free and reduced lunch is counted by individual children rather than by school, then we have major impacts to us. Yes. But it's too early to, and I just want to get back to the chief, because I think it's important to know that we've tried not to throw things in there that we don't know about. Now, I don't know if it's going to be a positive impact in fiscal 12 or a negative impact. I just don't think that should have been part of this conversation right now, because it's up in the air.
Okay. My next question towards you, John, is that, and I'm hoping I'm approximating off the math on the tax rate effect for this year, when it comes down to the tax rate being $2.02. If I do that off of the total majority impact of $7,677,150, that's approximately for every 100, and I'm not sure if my math is correct. I guess that's what I'm asking, if you may have this. For every $100,000, that's about 2.5 cents. Is that to reduce the 202? Is that about right? Do you know?
I don't understand the question. Let me explain. Let me try it another way.
Okay.
If you had a $2 increase, let's just round the numbers.
Yep.
And every $100,000 of value on a home, that would mean an increase of $200.
Yeah, okay, that's what I'm saying. So for us to also look at, as each one of us will go away from this on our budgets, to try to reduce that $7,677,000, to bring it down for every 100, again, rounding it to the 200, 100,000 will help reduce that by approximately only 2 cents on that $2.02.
Let me just clarify something here. The only reason I put the numbers for the tax rate in was illustration only. That's clearly something for the city. I'm not telling anybody that we're going to be at zero, that we're going to be at any level. It's just for illustrative purposes to show you what certain impacts have happened. Because I think the public needs to know that debt service, which we need to do, has had an impact. And this is the impact. Net debt. We didn't use the gross, we used the net. That retirement has had an impact.
Correct.
And the county has had an impact. And so this is for illustration purposes only. I would hope that people take the impact sheet and kind of throw it away later, because the idea was to try to show the impact of those areas, and some areas that we have obligations that we are committed to, that we can't adjust.
And that goes, and I appreciate that, because I agree. I think we look at something like this, and then it is for us to toss and let each one of our groups go back and do our budget work, because I think it's up to us as individually elected officials to say what is going to help increase our productivity as a school, help us increase our children's advantages in the world, so that we do that. And that goes to my question, and maybe slightly a comment to Mayor Farini, is that I want to make sure, because I kind of go with what Chief Furland was saying, is that last year, for the first time in my life being on the school system, we voted on a budget, and before it got to City Council, we kind of came back and said, it's probably not going to pass unless we can get this down to the zero. We were going to go up a very slight amount. I believe it was a little over $200,000, which was that. So I want to have a clarification that this year we don't have that type of discussion, because as Councilor Dwyer says, I'm not going to come back and say, well, somebody said something. And whether it be 0% or what we feel, and I think we did this as a school system last year very well, and it was a very split vote, is that we were going to go up, I think it was 0.0175% or something along that lines with that increase, and unless we came in with zero. And so it's kind of divided the board. But again, as you stated, Mayor, you want us to come in with our best projections that are going to allow, whether it be the fire, police, or schools, to have minimal impact but not burdening the taxpayer. And again, I just
what I said was 4% from this year's operating, which would be 96% of this year's budget, as a tool for us as council and you as elected officials on your boards and commissions to engage in the process of understanding the impact of what that might be. Because we're looking 3 years out, we're looking at potential impacts, many of which are easy to predict, some of which are hard to predict, and that's what we're trying to do.
And again, I'm just trying to clarify that we don't have a discussion that may have happened like that last year. I want to come back, when we vote on a budget, we stay on it.
We may not agree on the history of how it unfolded last year, and frankly, I think it's better to look ahead. Councilor Coviello.
Thank you. I'm trying to understand why there's a 32% increase in fiscal year 12. Is that just the makeup of the department?
The retirement.
But I thought you said in these ones you reduced it back to the 25%.
No, but what happened is the actual retirement rates are going up.
Okay.
So the retirement rates are going up. I have a sheet that I can show you of what's happening with retirement. I had provided it earlier, and I can provide a copy of a sheet that shows what happens in fiscal year 11 and 12. Excuse me, 12 and 13. Excuse me.
Okay, and then I guess if I can just make a comment about jumping on what Chris said earlier, is that I think a lot of us are going to try and assign blame, not to a person, but probably the economy. And I don't think the economy is the problem. I think that just accelerated the time where it came to be a problem. And so I think that's why we really do need to look at structural changes and not hope for something to happen and a change in revenues of some sort. It's just, it was going to happen anyways.
Councilor Smith waiting politely.
Thank you. Just one question on the retirement figures that we have here. If we do not approve the contracts coming in, then the retirement costs could go up because of the 125% rule coming down from Concord. Are those numbers taking into effect here?
No, because those would happen over a number of years. It would happen as people retire.
Right, but let's just, if we didn't approve some of them and there was some retirements, it could be.
Sure, it could be impact.
It could
Sure.
be a large impact right up front
Yes.
of $1 million plus per year. But
Could be,
that-
depending on who retires when they retire.
okay. So those numbers are not in.
No,
here, is it?
because we probably, we don't know when people are going to retire.
Okay. If I can continue?
Sure, Councilor Smith.
Thank you. The budget process this year is going to really affect upon how the city is going to have to do business, as the mayor said, not only for this coming year, but the years to come. Over the past, there's been some disagreements between different boards in the council about if we're, a lot of infighting. And I'm hoping we do not have to continue that. I don't want to see that go on. But I think we have to start looking at some of the successes that we've been able to build upon already in the city. One of them I look to is the school department, with the merging they've been able to do with the athletic department. I think, as everyone can say, that has been a very positive outcome. And I think we have to start looking at doing more of that and looking at areas where we can combine some of the duties and services that are going on out there. For instance, again, with the school department, you have your own accounting system, payroll system. Maybe that should be merged into City Hall. I'd like to see a report back to find out what kind of cost savings that could bring. I think we're going to have to look at some of our city services and make decisions and look at the impacts of costs of possible closing of Station 3 for the fire department. Maybe a possible of looking at and see what the cost of that is to see if it's cost effective. Look at the police department and look at some of the services that they provide. For instance, the membership to the CERT team. And I'm not trying to pick on anyone or pick out any particular problems or issues, but find out what are those actual fiscal costs going to come to. Is there cost savings in possibly moving the administrative offices out of Little Harbor and moving them up here to City Hall, again, to combine services? Maybe even the possibility of the school department looking at getting out of the real estate business, and we put all municipal buildings under one fiscal facilities manager within the city. These are the ideas that I think we have to look upon. If we don't, I think in years to come, we're going to only be have to look at layoffs, and then you're going to start to see a big decline in the city's services themselves. The services that the citizens have come used to, and quite frankly has made the city the shining star for the state of New Hampshire. Those are some of the things I'm hoping that we can get out of this meeting and be able to come back to and to discuss, not just a random 0%, because I think the comment was made in the paper by the fire commissioner saying that what was the purpose of having the meeting? You could have just sent us saying you want to have a 0%. I'm really hoping this year we get to open the door to be able to have conversations so that we're all working together and we can combine services where we can. It doesn't necessarily always mean that it's going to mean one less person doing the job, but maybe we can just do it more efficiently and redo how we do our government.
Councilor Coviello.
With all due respect, I got to disagree a little bit with Councilor Smith. A lot of the things mentioned weren't the skyrocketing problems we're having. We're not having skyrocketing problems with facilities, and I think exactly the opposite. If we're going to combining services, we have to talk about the reduction of people. It's the skyrocketing in retirement and health insurance benefits that's a problem. We're going to have to attack those issues. There is going to be penny and nickel savings in doing those things, and we should do those things. But we'd be sending the wrong message if we weren't clear that we really need to go after that tough nut and have it be the full-time equivalent staff that has to be reduced.
Councilor Smith?
The one thing with retirement, you have to realize that those are contractual obligations that the workers of the city have earned. And they deserve, and they were promised their retirement packages and their benefits. And so that's a fixed cost. That's an obligation we have, unless you want to start laying off people. And, you know, you look at the police, the fire, the DPW workers, the teachers. Could the schools be as effective they are with less teachers? I don't think so. And I wouldn't be one to say that let's start increasing class sizes just to cut away one or two teachers and start cutting out staff. But retirement costs, one of the big reasons that it's coming down on us so much is from what's being pushed down to us from the state of New Hampshire. We also, maybe in future contracts, we can start working with the unions to start maybe stepping away from the state program and start looking at a defined contribution 401k plan system. Maybe that's what's going to have to go in the future. That's what some other communities are beginning to do. But right now, a lot of these costs are fixed costs that we have the obligations to. And we have to start looking at a different way of governing the city and providing the services to the citizens.
Further speakers, Councilor Kennedy, then I saw Councilor Hedmonic, he's a first timer, then we'll go to you, Councilor Kennedy.
I guess I'm looking at this and saying, and listening to some of the dialogue, and there's $7.6 million we're talking about trying to save, so that's going to take some dramatic actions and probably headcount reductions. But I think this is going on all around the country, and I think it would be wise for people to look at what other cities are doing, because other people are having the same problem. This isn't unique to us, and maybe we can get ideas. There was an article I think was circulated about Mesa, changed the way they, some of their police or civilians now doing routine investigative work or nonviolent crimes where they save money. So in this search to restructure, and I think we do have to restructure, it's been said, but I'll say it again. I think if you look at the last 20 years, municipal government workers throughout the United States, wages and benefits have gone up much more dramatically than the private sector, and now that the recession's come along, we're all of a sudden discovering we can't afford it. And this is a really good exercise, even though it's going to be painful, because it's only going to get worse unless we get it under control. And someday we may not be able to afford to have police unless we get the costs down to some reasonable level. And even as I look at this little sheet, the COLA is 2.8%, but I just read 2 days ago that the payroll average in the private sector was 2%. So even the COLA is increasing municipal wages higher than the average person in the United States gets as a wage increase. On top of the COLA, we have steps and stipends and all kinds of good things. So it was unsustainable, and it's been said earlier, and I think it's a really good exercise because it'll make our city stronger into the future if we can get this under control.
Further discussion. Thank you, Councilor Hetmanic. Chief Ferlin?
Technical.
I'm sorry, Councilor Kennedy. No, I'm going to get in trouble. Councilor Kennedy.
I just have to say I'm glad that I got my personal school budget done Monday night. But with that said, I really hope that everyone digs deep and looks at their budget. I mean, just because we asked for 0% last time and how that all played out, at this point I think it's water under the bridge. But we shouldn't have to ask. You should look at your community. You should be talking to the citizens. You should be realizing that people are really struggling. People are questioning their viability to live in Portsmouth. And I guess I would ask everyone to really dig deep, look inside, see what you can give up, and see what we can find. Maybe it is consolidating of services, maybe it is looking at buildings, it can be all those things. But think outside the box and see what we can come to the table with so that we do come in with a budget, because I'll be honest with you, $2 is a lot of money on 1,000.
Thanks, Councilor Kennedy. Chief Ferlin, then Mr. Gamester, then Eric.
Technical question. When we're doing the exercise of 96% of FY10, is it the FY10 budget that was approved in May and June of '09, or is it the FY10 budget that is the actual one after the collective bargaining agreements. We have one that was approved. What is that number that we're looking at? Because for us, that's a big difference.
Well, yeah, it probably should be after collective bargaining agreements are settled, because it's reality. I mean, if you do it the other way, you're actually school department and other departments that already have contracts settled are on a different plane than police department or fire department.
Thank you.
So for the record, reality budget versus what was initially, right?
Roger that.
All right, Commissioner Gamester.
Mayor Farini, I'm probably the one that Councilor Smith said, why don't you just mail me the 0% increase and I'll go from there. I'm very pleased that we came here tonight and found out it wasn't 0, but it was really a 7% decrease. Because in essence, a 4% loss and add a 3% COLA loss is 7. I will make the first statement around the table tonight that that is going to be a reduction in force, in manpower, in the fire department. I don't know how these people are, and how these people are, and how John's people are. It's going to cost people. And two things are going to have to happen. One is, and I made the second statement nobody ever wants to pick up in the newspaper. We have 19,900 people that never show up at a meeting, and I hope they're all listening tonight, because if they like the level of service that they are getting, if they like their teachers, they like their police department, they want an ambulance to show up, they want their garbage picked up, they want their sewer line fixed, they want tonight when I go home, if there's water all over Bartlett Street, that to be repaired, and they sure as hell don't want their snow to be only plowed during 8 to 5. Monday through Friday. So if those people are out there, those 19,900 other folks, granted a lot of those are children, but they're populace here, to come out and speak, if they want to maintain the service and the level of service that I think is done very well here, okay, come out and tell us. Just come out and tell us. Because right now, I can tell you that there's going to be mayhem in the fire department. That may even be already starting to find out that there's going to be a loss of manpower. I don't know how I'm going to do that, or how the chief's going to suggest that we do it. I've heard the word restructuring from more than one person up there. I understand that restructuring several years ago, I wanted to make this fire department and all the surrounding fire departments a coalition of one. And it fell off the table somewhere. I don't know where it fell off, but it fell off the table. That's what it should have been happening, because right now the fire departments wouldn't have this problem. We'd probably have more equipment, more manpower, and probably be run a lot better as a whole, even though you can't get much better rather than the one we have. So that's the statement I have to make, and I just would like to reaffirm what Kent said, that you're not telling us a mandate. You'd like to see what? I want to see what 4% loss or a 7% loss does to you. But a mandate has not been issued to come in at a 4% reduction.
Nor was a mandate issued last time. That was a discussion tool, just like the tool we offered this time.
I beg to differ with you. I had the same opinion that he did. That, as a matter of fact, I asked at one of the meetings, is this a Band-Aid? Because it was in the newspaper the next day. The minute it's in the newspaper, with your name beside it, it becomes a mandate. I'm sorry, but it does. No, even though, Tom, you didn't say it.
Much appreciated, but I think that this part of the discussion, entertaining as it is, may not be most productive at this time. I think that, I've termed it the way I've termed it. You can call it what you want.
Well, I guess there's a lot of people that may not say things.
What I'll do,
I'm
Dick,
not afraid to say
so that we'll do, at the end, we'll sum up, then we'll put it in writing, and so that, a mayor or any city council who says they're mandating something doesn't have the legal authority to do so.
Well, that's what I thought.
Well, I'm well aware of that.
Unless they voted for it. But
well, so I
just
think
it sounds like it.
Like I said, it happens when we vote on the budget. So we need to continue. Yes, City Manager.
Let's not lose track of the fact that we have a charter provision that outlines the budget process. This is a hybrid of the budget process. Never quite liked this hybrid, but it is what it is. It's here, and we need to do it because we have a different way of doing things here in Portsmouth to get things started. But the charter does have certain provisions. The budgets are submitted to the city manager in accordance with the charter. And I've worked very closely with all of you over the last 12 years, and we try to work to make sure that we don't affect services. We try to look at where we have efficiencies, and I think all the departments have done a wonderful job in that regard. Unfortunately, as Jerry Heckmonick has said, and I think Eric has alluded to it, and I get a newsletter every day that has things happening all around the country. Similar things are happening, even worse. I mean, actually, we're in better shape than most, to be honest with you. And we have the luxury of being able to have time to look at these things. In places that relied heavily on sales tax and other types of things, they had to do within a fiscal year that they're actually in, they had to reduce 30 and 40%. And so that's where we have the luxury here of actually having the time to have a conversation, which I hope remains civil, that we can get to a point that we know where we have our weaknesses. We try to look to solve those, and even look to what you said, Commissioner. If people want X rate increase and want to maintain their services at that level the way they were, fine. That's going to be up to the City Council to make that determination. But I think people can't lose sight of the fact that we actually have a budget process that by law is in the charter. This is more or less an ability for everybody to get together to have a conversation. Technically, if you really want to know it, you submit the budget to me, I can cut your budget or I can increase your budget. I can do whatever I want until it's submitted to the City Council. But the point is that we try to work together, and I think everybody here has understood that we've tried to work together over the years to try to come out with a positive outcome. So I think it's important for people to understand there is a charter provision that has the budget outline.
Thank you, John.
I'm well aware of that, John, and I appreciate the position you're in, and I was not trying to be antagonistic or anything, but I feel as though some things have to be said. In other words, is it a mandate? I wanted someone to say no or yes. You know, I wanted to feel as though Kent did. You know, I'll do whatever you tell me to do. I just need to be told what I want to hear.
Well,
That's
and I can sympathize.
Slip if I've ever heard of one.
That's fine.
No, that wasn't bad. That was a mistake.
I don't think we could follow that one.
Councilor Dwyer.
Well, I think that the worst thing we could do as a council is waste your time as a commissioner, as departments. And so I think you've heard already tonight from a majority of the council in their statements kind of how they're thinking about this. So I think it's incumbent upon us, whether you call it a mandate, you call it a guideline, whatever, to communicate to you what we'll stand for and what we won't. And otherwise, we're just wasting your time. So don't try to obscure the issue. You know, the idea to me is to read it for what it is. I mean, and I've heard from enough of my fellow councilors tonight to know that the votes are there to say we have got to really look at this year, and that 96% may be generous. So it's not a matter of getting 50 people out here to say something. It's 50 people to pay the increased the tax bills. People can say all they want, but then we're putting that burden on what we know is a burdened community. So, I mean, we have to take some responsibility here. It's not a game. And you've already heard from enough people to know where the votes are.
Councilor Spear, second award for most patient waiting.
Thank you. I just want to comment on what Commissioner Gamester said about meeting the same level of service that we have in the past going in the future. I'm afraid if we continue to do that, we're going to end up with the best government we can't afford. And looking at, remember during last year's work sessions, I looked at a graph showing, past years, the trends were going up in operating budget for all departments, some more than others. And you can see it again here going forward. And it is, as Councilor Coviello said, it is a coincidence that the economy is hitting a bad time, and now we have to have a reckoning. But if this was a one-time deal where there's some unforeseen spike either in costs or loss of revenues, okay, maybe we need to do $1 or $2 increase in the taxes. But I see this happening this year, and then the next year, and then the next year, and it doesn't stop. To me, the only way to get a handle on this stuff is to control the costs now. In fact, the sooner you control costs, in all situations, whether you're trying to make up a depleted retirement fund or any situation like that, you need to control the costs now. Now, when it comes time to trying to figure out, well, what kind of reduction are we talking about? and a mandate or not a mandate. Last year, we talked a lot about a 0% either budget or tax increase. We ended up having, I wanted a 0% tax increase. We ended up having an 11-cent tax increase. So although it proved a useful exercise that each department went through to achieve their budget goals, and we came near a 0% tax increase. This time, when I'm trying to think about, well, what can people afford, I am reluctant to have any tax increase of any kind. I am shocked that we would even think about it. When I think about, we know we have nationally 10% unemployment. We have substantial unemployment here. We know free and reduced lunches are up at the schools, even in Portsmouth. We know our revenues come from property taxes, which means if you lose your job or you're furloughed or you have wage reductions, your property bill is the same, that you still pay it. And to me, I would rather not be increasing people's taxes. Now, and in this city, I'm talking about, I'd rather not increase people's taxes. In many municipalities, we talked about sales and income taxes. In other states, they're seeing huge revenue shortfalls. So even keeping things level from last year to this year and going forward, to me, is a pretty good spot compared to what I see other places doing. So I think it's more than an academic exercise to have a 96% of last year's budget. To me, it's a meaningful exercise, and in fact, I think going forward we may implement some of that. As Councilor Dwyer said, that might be generous if what we need to do is get where we need to go. So I just wanted to make a point of that I'm taking this very seriously, and I think if we can tackle our problems in FY11, it will be actually easier to handle our budgets in FY12 and FY13. If we delay these problems, it'll be worse in FY12 and FY13.
Thanks, Councilor Spear. Further discussion? And
I'm sorry, Cap. I know you're looking for
Chief, absolutely not. We are here. We're ready to do it.
I understand the exercise, and that's fine. My question is, I am going to be projecting out the police department's needs, demands over the next several years. But I don't know what landscape to project that on to. For example, I'm just running through these numbers real quickly through my head. 96% of FY12 equates to almost 12 reductions in the police department. That means that the police department will be at a staffing level before I got on the job in 1983. But I know that Portsmouth, the landscape of Portsmouth, is not the same as it was in 1983. I can't make people stop calling the police for emergency services, whether it be an ambulance, a fire truck, or a police officer. I can't stop that. There's still the amount of calls for service out there. Those aren't going to go away. I still need to have police officers. They're still going to need firefighters to attend to those things. My question is, I looked at the agenda for next week and I see events, forwarded to the city manager for approval. It doesn't stop. I mean, we have to attend to these events. We have to attend to all these approvals that the city council is doing. My question is, as I'm projecting out the landscape that I have to figure out how to quantify the police services for it, what is the landscape that the city council plans to have for me for the next couple of years? Are we going to continue to grow Portsmouth, or are we going to pull it back so that I can adequately police it with less people?
Well, I think it's a valid question, and I think that it harkens back to the exercise creates the opportunity for us all to have the discussion and understand the impacts. So, for example, I can't say what a city council in 3 years will do, nor even next year, nor even this year for that matter. But if you look at the raw numbers that we have on certain things that we can understand, like the retirement, for example, and then you can start to extrapolate from that, you're going to do your planning for the next 3 years, as is the fire department, as is the school department, as are we as a city council, and we're going to have to engage in that discussion together. But we can no more give you a number 3 years out. We can give you what we know retirement's going to be, or have a good sense of. But as you know, as you get further out in time, it's concentric circles as to how much we know. And we have to do the best we can, because if we do a 1 year at a time thing, that government functions at its worst when it only looks at 1 year at a time. And so I think it's helpful if we try to look forward. And we're going to learn from each other in doing this, and I'm sure we can all do it because we always have. It doesn't mean we might all end up agreeing, but I think we'll understand the analysis, and then policymakers can make better decisions. Someone here was Councilor Kennedy.
I think you make a valid point, and I would encourage that when we start looking at numbers and start bringing things forward, we look at all data. And I know many of those events, the event coordinators are paying for the services. But if there are events that's not happening, then we really do need to look at that. And I'm in full agreement with what you're saying, if that is happening. So I guess we need as much data and as much evidence as possible to make great decisions.
Dr. Schulter.
So just a quick question. Going back to your thought experiment, right? You're suggesting that we look at the impact of 96% budget next year, but you also mentioned something, and maybe I don't know where it fits in. You said something about a 5% reduction in force, 2%. What is that?
Let me say it again.
Yes, please.
And I'll repeat it again.
Please do.
And it'll show up in writing again. And it's not a mandate, it's a discussion point.
I just want to understand it.
Perfectly fine. What would happen if, as part of that 96%, and again, understanding Governor Lynch last year looked at 95% for his department heads. If we looked at 96% of what we did in 2010, and then as part of that, you looked at the impacts of 2% reduction in force of, fully
to get to that 96,
and 3% in the year after 2012 for a total of 5%. As another tool, so that people will be looking at attrition rates and those kinds of things, which I know you look at anyway, but it just helps us understand what that might mean and how that fits into the puzzle. It's also something for the public to understand in terms of, people talk about what does that potentially mean? And so indeed, as Commissioner Gamester said, maybe they show up and say, we want this level of service. But we got to put that information out there and do the analysis and see what happens.
Right.
That's my thought.
So the only thing I take away, I'm going to take away your attitude on that, because I really feel that what Councilor Dwyer said gave me a mixed message. One is it's a thought experiment, see what the impact is. The other is you should be paying attention to what we're saying, because I believe there's the votes on the council to do that number.
Well,
so I'm a little confused, but I'm willing to take away your message.
We don't know how we're going to vote now. Councilor Hetmanek.
We're reluctant here. I'm having trouble getting started answering this. I drove down to my son's house for Christmas, and when I was driving down, people were talking. I was listening to a radio talk show, and they explained that in Hawaii the budget problems are so bad that kids used to have Wednesday afternoons off, so they went to school 4.5 days a week. But now the situation's so severe they have Fridays off. So here we have a system that's educating kids for 3.5 days a week to save money. Now, I think that's a horrendous problem, because I think we all know, at least I believe, the longer you spend in school and study, the smarter you're going to get. It's about time and effort. Now, we don't want to get in that situation. So I think you've got to take this 96% seriously, because we're going to run into the point of there's not going to be any money for schools, and then you're going to run schools 3 days a week.
Councilor Dwyer.
Well, I will repeat what I said before and then give you one little division problem here. I just don't want to waste anybody's time. And to me, the words thought experiment and exercise are sounding like you're not hearing what a number of us are saying, and I don't want to be misleading. I think, there's not a lot of time to do this. If you look at the 7.6 million on that sheet, and you divide it by 75,000, the average FTE cost per employee, you get a good round number, and that's a very scary number. It's 100. And I don't think, to me, that's the only thing I need to know about this to say this is not a thought experiment. If the difference between where we are, right now, even if I say 50, if I cut that in half and let the tax rate go, over $1 increase, that's still 50 people. And you can't get to that by postage stamps. I mean, you just can't get there that way. We know that because we don't have fat. So I just don't want to.
No,
I
hear
personally,
what
I don't
you're
want to feel like I'm saying, oh yeah, this is a thought experiment.
No, but it was presented to us as an analytical tool.
Well, it's an analytical
Well,
tool, but
understand that.
it's a general consensus of a direction we want to analyze with seriousness
Well,
as to
that's an
potential
important
implementation.
Message. That's an important message. I think.
Right.
And
And so
I think we're hearing that.
I feel like I'd like to stay here all night and say that over and over, because I feel at every other meeting of this type we've had over the last 5 years, we've tried to communicate that, and it's been heard as sort of a tool, an exercise, a whatever, and that's not what we're talking about.
Well, if I could just finish, moving forward as we look to the future. I've never been in the situation where we've had what Kent has often referred to as a joint budget committee. I've only experienced the committee of the whole, and I'd be curious to understand what the difference might be and what the impact of the and how the discussion might be different in a joint budget committee versus this one-time meeting of the
Let me, if I might.
So,
Because
it's a procedural question.
in 1997, we created a joint budget committee. And it had representation from the school department, had representation from the fire department, had representation from the police department, and from the city council. The idea was similar to what we're doing here, but it only included a small portion of those legislative bodies. It worked for the first few years. It seemed fine, but we were also in a growth pattern at that particular point, and we were able to, the projections were more positive, and we were able to exchange information. That was a real important part of the JBC. What had happened as it got further out, and as things started, as people started to see that there might be some issues as it related to costs, a lot of times other members of the boards, if only, from the school board, from the city council, weren't involved in these meetings on a regular basis. So what would happen is we'd move forward on a unified track with the JBC, only to have it blow up when it got to the full boards. And people would just look and say, geez, why did they spend all this time? Why did they spend all this effort? And then when it got to the full boards, either school board or city council or whatever, it then changed. So that was why it was felt that probably should have everybody together to hear it all at once. And the real part of the JBC was the exchange of information. There was really never a policy directive ever given. Quite frankly, I started the JBC, and the reason was with then council member Alex Hansen and Councilman LaFond, and the idea was because the charter, and I'm just going to go back to the charter again, the charter is written in such a way as I put out a request to the departments to submit the budgets to me in accordance with the charter, and the charter is very specific about that. It's technically the city manager's budget until I send it to the city council in April. Then it becomes their budget, and then that's why we have the work sessions. The reason for the JBC was really for my benefit, being a new city manager at the time, was understand the police commission, the fire commission, the school departments, what their needs were, and to work with them. And it worked well for a number of years, but then I think it really kind of needed to have everybody's input if we were going to have some kind of sit down with the city council to send some kind of direction. The city council, in many places in other parts of the world, basically would direct the city manager to do this, would sit with the city manager and say, this is what we want. Then I'd go back to each of the departments and say, well, this is how you're going to submit your budget, because I technically can do that under the charter and in the form that I want. And that's the way it typically would work in other worlds. But here we have a hybrid of the system with police commissions, fire commissions, and the like. So, did that help at all?
That helped a lot.
Okay.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Leslie Stevens, School Board Member Leslie Stevens.
I just wanted to get back to what Councilor Dwyer, sorry, my voice is gone. I want to get back to the numbers that Councilor Dwyer was just mentioning. You were saying that using $75,000 as the full-time employee average pay.
Plus benefits.
Plus benefits,
Including
right,
benefits.
right, plus benefits. That's, for the 7 million, that's a cut of 100 people, is that what I hear you
and
saying?
Just sort of as a rule of thumb, if you were to think of what are we really looking at, if we were trying to get to
Yep.
the whole thing,
And is that what we're trying to get to?
that's the question.
I think that
Over a couple of years, that's what I heard the mayor say, over 2 years, we, without having a tax rate that's not sustainable, we've got to get there over a couple-year period.
So we're looking at eliminating 100 people over several years?
No, I think you did not, no. Let's start, let's, before we get to the result, we can't get to the result before we do the work. And what I said, I'll say it again, was 96% of 2010, and look at what 2% in 2011 and 3% reduction in force in 2012 would be, okay? Now, we need to understand as counselors what that impact would be. Councilor Dwyer offered as a clarifier to say this is what these kinds of numbers mean in an order of magnitude. You can try or may want to characterize everything we say as an order, or you can say the City Council, albeit that there are no doubt differences, pretty clearly wants to move in the direction of those kinds of reductions. 96% of 2010, 2% in 2011, 3% in 2012, and look at what that looks like. A, understand the impact. See if as policymakers we think it's in the city's best interest with your input and analysis and comparative analysis of other communities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we'll make a decision in June after a long dialogue. It is not our goal to set a bar and say we absolutely have to meet this. On the other hand, everybody here has pretty seriously demonstrated on the City Council side that the magnitude of the problem of what we see for increase in costs requires this kind of analysis, and there's strong interest. Does that mean we're not going to vote till we've done the work? So all of us, meaning all of us. So we have a good history of open discussions here. Those meetings that happen with the school board, the fire commission, police will be illuminating. I will add, and I think it's not a bad time to add as we get closer to the end of this meeting, perhaps, that the City Council in the past has had questions for people about impacts on their budgets. What would it mean if you did this? What is the impact of that? What does this mean? I'm going to request that City Councilors provide me with questions that they would like to ask any and all commissions and boards. Get them to me perhaps within 2 weeks, or we can probably within 2 weeks. And then I would send them out to you and request that the boards give us written responses to those in advance of meetings so that we've got an understanding before we go into meeting as to what kind of impacts we're concerned about. And then you're going to bring your own data, and you're going to say, hey, if we do this, this is the problem we have. And I think that we are wide open in terms of listening to that, but we have to have some sort of a direction, and I think we seem to have one as a council, but we need to do the work. We can't put the result before the work, and we don't want to. Leslie.
I think I agree with Mitch that I hear a little bit of a mixed message, and I appreciate what you're saying, and I think that makes a lot of sense. To Councilor Smith's point, if we're going to look to work together and combine services and all of that, what's the process for that? Are you looking for us to bring you ideas of what we think would help? Do you all have ideas that you can bring to us? How do we make that process happen?
That's an excellent question. And you know what? Tonight, we're not going to answer all those questions.
I think you're right.
And so I can talk with what Councilor Smith talked about, and I've done it in other communities. We're going to have impact bargaining. We're going to have a lot of things that we're going to be dealing with. We have to analyze what we're trying to achieve. Yeah. You know, there may be some savings, there may not be. We may have better services at the same cost. I don't know. I mean, so it's a long road. the idea would be to get started talking about it. And certainly we can identify those areas, and there is a process that we'd go through. And I don't think during this budget process, I think we're really looking at fiscal 11 for some of those, fiscal 12 for some of those things. It's really unrealistic to think that you're going to, and I think Councilor Smith really was looking at long-term.
That makes sense.
I think it's unrealistic to think you're going to change certain things by July 1 of this year. You're not. If there is a direction by the City Council to reduce by a certain amount, the fact of the matter is it's going to end up with staffing.
Yep.
And then you rebuild it as you go through as redesigning some of these things. I think you have to be realistic about it if you're trying to build a budget for July 1 of this year. So does that help a
It
little
does.
bit?
It sounds like it's a process, but I guess I just like to see how that process can move forward.
Sure, and that's something that, I think we're going to have to, talk about internally and talk with the other department heads and work it out, because it is not going to be a one fiscal year thing. It could be that we'll work on one aspect of it over a year, because we're going to have to probably impact bargain some of these things with the unions.
Thank you.
Council Kennedy.
But in the spirit of communication, I would encourage, if you have some ideas, to bring them forward.
Can we get a microphone in front of Esther, please? That's okay.
But in the spirit of communication, I would encourage, if you have ideas of combination or thoughts, and bring them to Dr. Schulman. I'm sure that City Manager Bohank will be more than happy to look at them, and so that we can start the process. So we're not sitting here in 2011 saying, oh, wouldn't that be a great idea? And we haven't really started. So if people have ideas on any of this, yes, laying people off is one way of doing it, but there are other ways, and we can look at them. And there's also other ways of bringing more revenue in, and I encourage us to look at that. So I'd say look at the big picture, and let's go from there and see what we can do.
Commissioner Gamester.
I find it hard to bring this one subject up, and please back up. You've always been in my way.
We're protecting you, Dickie.
They're thinking you're going to shoot me. I've not done this, but I need to say something about, we have two unions, they have two unions, you have one, I have 4 or 5 people, single contracts, but at this particular time, have negotiations, if they come forward and want to negotiate, have they been tainted by this discussion this evening?
Only if you continue talking. And I'm not trying to
John,
be flip about it.
John,
I'm not
I'm
trying
not-
to be flip about it. I'm just saying
No.
that I don't
You
believe
notice
that we
I
should-
didn't say. You notice I didn't say go any further.
Right. But the point is that we really should negotiate in public, because I think they're basically separate items.
But in a, I'm going to have to say it. In a way, we have. We're talking about reduction in force. We're talking about whatever happens.
And all those
happens.
collective bargaining agreements have provisions on how you deal with that. They're all outlined in
I
it.
just feel as though that we've tainted them for at least the next 6 months.
Well, again, that wasn't the intent. And
I-
whenever
I-
and if I might, Commissioner, whatever I said, I always said that all these numbers here that were presented were based on successfully entering into contracts with the 10-year rolling average and with the other benefits that the other unions received in successful negotiations.
And covered very carefully, and I agree. But if I was on the other end of this thing, I'm now looking at it going, oh my goodness, now what's changing on me? Okay.
Well,
And now I'll shut up so that it doesn't.
Well, and I really need to respond somewhat, but the thing is that this isn't anybody's making here. This isn't the police departments, the fire departments. This is not the public works department. This is nobody's fault. The fact of the matter is, this is a circumstance that we are in, and it's a circumstance that was created from a a downturn in the economy, and historically, what happens in downturns in economies, except for some of those states like Florida, Arizona, and Colorado that had sales tax that they relied heavily on in local government, where you have property tax reliance, it usually takes 18 to 24 months after the major crisis hits for it to hit through into local governments.
Are we last in, first out?
Well, basically what happens is because local governments have collective bargaining agreements, they have other responsibilities with education, fire and police and other services. It typically is something that hits later on and into the crisis. And that's been my experience. And that's what's happened at the state level this year. You saw it. I mean, you read it every day in the paper. It's happening in other parts of the state and other communities. Happened in some of our surrounding communities. So all I'm saying is that from my perspective, tonight was to really just, as I was requested to do, provide some data for everybody to talk about, to be aware of, so that we wouldn't have a compounded situation in fiscal 12 and 13, and everybody looks at each other and says, well, geez, why didn't we know about that? And so this is the time to think about innovative ways to deal with things, and maybe we can come up with some.
Quick question. I asked it, but I don't think you heard it while we were talking. We're kind of the last in. It's 11 and 12 you're figuring to be the low dip. Are we first out in this economic?
Councilor Hedmonic wants to take a poke at that.
I'll take a shot at that.
John,
If you look
only
at
with John's
John, too.
experience.
I'm sorry?
John too, but Jerry, go ahead, Jerry.
Okay, let me give you my shot. If you look at recessions, it's all about employment, and then as the recession starts, employment or unemployment keeps growing. As unemployment grows, people stop spending money. Finally, at the depths of the recession, when the unemployment is the worst, that's when city starts feeling it. So that's why the city feels it later. The unfortunate part is unemployment always lags. So you're not going to be first out. You're going to be last in, last out.
Okay. John, you don't have to.
No, and again, that was a good example of an explanation.
Further discussion or commentary? In closing, I do believe this is productive and a good, robust discussion. I'm sure that we're going to have more of them, and I appreciate everyone's good faith and hard work, and I mean by that not just elected officials, but staff. Nobody thinks our staff and elected officials don't work hard. We're dealt a hand that we need to look at, and I appreciate your patience and forbearance this evening in our discussions, and I look forward to a productive interaction. Thank you very much.
Thank you.